Welcome back to the Cove at Chautauqua. My pleasure to bring you the microphone here. Husain Haqqani, he was ambassador from Pakistan to the United States from the years 2008 to 2011. He's been a trusted advisor to 3 Pakistani prime ministers. He's a professor at Boston University and a former director of its Center for International Relations. He also is the co-chair of the Husain Institute's project on the future of the Muslim world and the editor of the journal Current Trends in Islamic Thought. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice being here again, Jim.
It's good to have you again. Thank you for the pleasure of your company here this morning with the topic that we have, which is on everybody's mind, and everybody, I think, is in the mood of thinking, is there a solution to what's happening in the Middle East? Is there a peace possibility down the road in the Middle East?
So, Jim, I am one of those who always starts by telling Americans that stop thinking of the world as a problem for you to solve. Think of it as a situation for you to understand. I mean, this is a great nation. It's an engineering nation because, whenever you had problems, you found solutions. You have a relatively short history compared to, say, Europe or Asia or other countries. But that has also created a mindset here. And the mindset here is every problem must have a solution. It probably does. But most of those solutions, especially when they pertain to nations and masses of people, take time. And so this desire of, in my term as president, I'm going to sort out the Middle East and solve it, or in so-and-so's term as president, why can't we have peace in the Middle East? That is unrealistic. And what I hope to do today, when I speak here, along with my friend David Gartenstein-Ross, is to try and drill deeper and explain to my audience why is it that the whole region is a shambles in one form or another. If it's one thing that you can get together, then something else blows up. So let's go into the switchboard and figure out what's the configuration down there that's the problem, rather than fixing each little light bulb and each little electrical fixture at one time. Why do these fuses keep blowing up?
Well, can I go back? Because I think we're all thinking we found, the criminal we were looking for in Pakistan, and they were unaware that he was located in that section.
Well, I'm not too sure that they, whoever they is, were unaware. As you know, I was ambassador at that time. I got into a problem with my own government for making the argument that Pakistan needed to account for what happened. And very frankly, somebody knew where Osama bin Laden was. Did the president know? Maybe not. Did the prime minister know? Of course not. Did the army chief or the ISI, the Pakistani intelligence service chief, know? We don't know. The question is, nobody stays anywhere without somebody providing them the groceries, somebody selling them the morning milk, and not being able to see a doctor, etc. Who were those people? What was the network that kept Osama bin Laden in Pakistan? And if he was hiding in plain sight without Pakistani government finding out that he was there, why was the Pakistani government so incompetent? Those are questions that need to be answered. But again, going back to the original question, in the greater Middle East, in which I include Pakistan, although Pakistan is not an Arab country or not a Middle Eastern country in a historic sense, but it has become part of the Middle East by virtue of a Muslim majority. Why is it that many things happen in the greater Middle East which governments say they had no knowledge of? Are the governments that weak? If they are that weak, then why do we always assume here in the United States that they shouldn't be? So we need to kind of dig deeper and understand all of those things. But my simple answer to your question is, I don't buy it that nobody knew where Osama bin Laden was until the Americans found out where he was. Somebody in Pakistan knew, and who that somebody was is for Pakistan to explain to the world.
Husain Haqqani, we're well aware that we talk about the emerging countries of the world, and we first of all put China as one of the great emerging countries, and then we put India as the second one. And your relationship with India today, are you
Well, look, I am again in a minority in Pakistan. That's why I live in the United States right now, I guess. You know, I'm safer here. You know, you don't see me looking over my shoulder and wondering about whether somebody in that house will shoot at me for saying this kind of stuff. But very frankly, India is 6 times the size of Pakistan in population, 20 times the size of Pakistan in the size of GDP. India's GDP is growing at a rate of between 8 and 10%. India will be the world's 3rd largest GDP in a few years after the United States and China, overtaking Europe. It's ridiculous for Pakistan to want to compete with India. It's simply ridiculous. Pakistan should come to terms with the fact that it has a much larger neighbor and then settle down to a Canada-US type of relationship in which Pakistan is Canada and India is the United States. Take advantage of the fact. Yes, of course, the Pakistani equivalent of the Toronto Blue Jays can obviously play the New York Yankees in the American League, but that should be it. We should have a cricket league or whatever, and a hockey league, a field hockey league between India and Pakistan. The languages are identical, except they're written in 2 different scripts, but they're spoken language. You won't know the difference between Hindi and Urdu. There's 5,000 years of shared history. I mean, what is today Pakistan didn't exist until 1947 as a country. It was contrived, it was created. So now that we have it, we should think not about how do we settle scores of various issues with our neighbor, but to figure out how we can actually work together. Unfortunately, a majority of my countrymen don't think like that, but we will have peace and we will have greater success for both Pakistan and India when more and more people do think the way I do.
Well, let me ask this question regarding what we're well aware of today, where our Congress is debating whether or not we should accept the nuclear deal that John Kerry has worked out with Iran. What are your thoughts if that's a possibility?
So here's my short take on this. If the purpose of the Iran deal is to have good relations with Iran and end the isolation that you had with Iran from 1979, a deal is a good thing. If the purpose is to stop Iran from going nuclear, even in the best case scenario that John Kerry and his closest associates privately talk about, you're just postponing it. There are 2 things that make a country nuclear: the will to go nuclear and the means to go nuclear. Iran has both. And so just having a deal that will postpone it by a few years may actually delude you. And by the way, the title of my book, and let me make a plug because I'm shamelessly American in that way, you know. In America, there's nothing wrong with advertising, right? It's a legitimate way of doing things. Donald Trump has a big sign very near the White House because he's building some building, and he's put a huge, very obnoxious sign with Trump on it, you know. So if he can do that, I can surely tell people. The title of my book, the last book, is Magnificent Delusions. And the basic premise is that Americans sometimes, and American leaders, for various political or other reasons, delude themselves in their relationships with others. So my point is, I saw Pakistan go nuclear. I did not agree with it while being a Pakistani official, but I saw it go nuclear, and I saw it go nuclear while our government was promising the Americans that we will not go nuclear. And we were receiving aid from you on the guarantee that you will give us aid, you will give us conventional military weapons so that we don't have to go nuclear. And you bought it. And so I'm just kind of warning you that don't get into delusions again. The only way Iran doesn't go nuclear is when its leaders realize that maybe not going nuclear is more beneficial for them than going nuclear. And I don't think we've reached that point just by signing a deal.
Let me ask this question. What is the biggest advantage that Iran has gotten or will have if it is okay, if it is agreed to? Why did they agree to it? What are they getting out of it?
Well, first of all, I mean, their economy was in a shambles. They had sanctions. They couldn't, when I was ambassador of Pakistan, Pakistan looks after Iranian interests in the United States. You know, when 2 countries don't have diplomatic relations, somebody else steps in. So American interests are looked after in Tehran by the Swiss embassy, and the Iranian interests are looked after by the Pakistan embassy. So we have a section totally separate from our main embassy where the Iranian officials sit and all that, but we interacted a lot with them. Well, look, they had to come to us to file requests for every little bit and piece that they needed. For example, their Boeing 707s, which don't fly anymore here in this country. So for technology, for all those things, they didn't have the opportunity. And then you're releasing a lot of money. That's their money, to be honest, but that's money that you have held in escrow or frozen for many years. So it is an important advantage for them. It unleashes their potential as an economy. And I actually want that to happen because the people of Iran do deserve a break. That said, that break should not come with a complicated deal about what, when, how on the nuclear question. It should come in an honest dialogue with the Iranian leadership about what do you guys want. And it shouldn't be piecemeal. It should be a package deal about Iran's support for terrorism, Iran's anti-Semitism, Iran's treatment of its minorities. All subjects should be on the table. This business about let's do this first and that, it may work in a very Western context, but with the rest of the world, I have found that most nations, you need to have like a package deal. Where do you stand in relation to us? Not in terms of, okay, let's settle this and then maybe we can come to how you treat your Jews. Ain't gonna happen, because then they say, we agreed to specifically this, and this agreement wasn't. I'll just tell you a small story before I end. So the Taliban, everybody wants to talk to the Taliban also. I mean, John Kerry is a friend. I kept telling him never to do it. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled, Don't Talk to the Taliban. Of course, it's not like Americans always listen to their friends. So they've been wanting to talk to the Taliban. So I told everybody in the State Department this story, that in 1992, I was part of the government, and the Soviet Union had collapsed and Afghanistan was falling apart, and there was the Mujahideen, and they had 7 groups. And this was the precursor of the Taliban. And these guys were fighting amongst themselves, so we tried to get them to cut a deal. So anyway, after a lot of effort, 7 of them, the leaders, were put on a plane and taken to Makkah, which is the holiest place in Islamabad. They were made to swear before the Black Stone, which is like, the very holy place, that now this time they will have a deal they will stick to. And the deal was that Mr. Rabbani will become president, and there was a man called Hekmatyar, he will become prime minister. So we thought, now we have a coalition, we've got an agreement, everything's good. When they came back a few days later, Hekmatyar's people came and complained that Rabbani's people are not allowing me, the prime minister, to enter Kabul. So we went and said, hey, you guys agreed in Makkah of all places that he will be prime minister. They said, we agreed that he will be prime minister, and God is our witness. We accept him as prime minister. But we never agreed that the prime minister can enter the capital of the country. So you are dealing with a very different kind of people when it comes to cutting deals, Jim.
Can I phrase the question this way? If you were a member of Congress, would you vote for the deal or not vote for the deal?
I personally wouldn't vote for the deal, but I'd also state all my reasons for it. But there's very little likelihood that I will be a member of Congress. And here are the 2 reasons. One, of course, is I'm not yet an American citizen, so that's an obvious one. But the other one is that I'm not tribal enough. I'm not willing to be as polarizing as your Congress has become. Unfortunately, anybody who's willing to say, you know what, Jim, you make sense, and David, you make sense, and maybe I can make a third sense out of the 2 points of view, that is now gone, unfortunately. As an admirer of America, that is one thing I worry about most, is that America is essentially descending into tribal warfare. If the Sunnis and the Shias are fighting in Syria or in Yemen, give MSNBC and Fox News the time, they'll make that happen here.
Can I ask this question too? And I will ask it. Did you ever think we would have ISIS as a force to deal with?
Actually, the journal that I edit, Current Trends in Islamist Thought, we had an article about ISIS about 4 years ago. We saw that this group is emerging. Now, did we predict that, or could anybody predict that they will become as powerful as they did? No, nobody could. But that the idea existed, definitely, and it's important to trace and follow the ideas that are emerging in different parts of the world. People who had an eye on what Marx was writing and what Lenin was doing could have understood what they might do if they ever came to power. And that's exactly what has happened. Some people who knew about, and David is another person who has been working on Islamist extremist groups, when you study what they think, what they say, what they write, you get an idea that if they ever wield power in any part of the world, this is what they are going to do.
But haven't you been more or less shocked, I might put it, that the young people of France, the young people of Britain, and even the young people of America are joining ISIS?
I will leave that question to be answered by my colleague David Gartenstein-Ross. He is an expert on the recruitment process. He understands how it happens. My short answer to this is, I am not shocked. I am disturbed. I am upset, but I'm not shocked. Shock means having something that you didn't anticipate. Here's the problem. When you create ghettos of Muslims in France, or marginalized people, do not help them assimilate, do not observe radicalization processes within your own society, or in the case of Britain, actually allow radical clerics to come from other countries to radicalize your own people, why should anybody be shocked that this kind of outcome happens?
You're going to have that question answered by that gentleman.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are going to interview him in a minute, so therefore, I'll let you ask that to my more able colleague. It's always best.
No.
More people need to learn this. They need to toss the ball to the player who can take it to the goal better than themselves.
Well, let me give him the microphone, and I'll pause for these messages, and I'll be back with guest number 2 here on the Middle East. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Cove here at Chautauqua. We continue our conversation this morning with Husain Haqqani. I'm going to have you do me the favor, but before I do that, Husain, I would like you to give me your thoughts about this institution that has invited you a number of times to be a speaker here. What does Chautauqua Institution mean to you?
Well, it means to me that there are people in this country who really are keen to learn and interact with various opinions, ideas. Somebody asked me when I was coming here, so what's the Chautauqua that you're going to? And I said, it's the Disneyland of the mind. It's a theme park. It's a theme park for people who come there to expand their horizons. And the very fact that people come, and the people I meet each time I've come here, it just shows it's the best side of the United States in many ways. Good people, hardworking people, people who worked a lot and then retired, saying, you know what, my knowledge, my learning, my appreciation of beauty is lacked. I've been a physician in Minnesota. I need to go to Chautauqua to listen to some good music, listen to some interesting people from all over the world, talk about different subjects, and also, take nice long walks and kayak in the lake. And so it's a very unique institution, and I hope that this institution continues to grow and flourish, and can modernize at the same time.
Lifelong learning.
Lifelong learning, absolutely. Disneyland of the mind.
Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
Please introduce the gentleman with you.
Well, my friend David Gartenstein-Ross is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Over the years, and I've known him for several years now, he has emerged as an expert in radical Islamic movements, especially the violent extremist movements that have emerged from radical Islam. He monitors them, he examines them, he analyzes them, and he knows more about some of this stuff than perhaps many people in your government.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Jim. It's great to join you.
Welcome to Chautauqua.
It's wonderful to be here. Is
it your first visit?
It's my first visit, but Chautauqua has been with me basically since my youth. The town I grew up in, a small town in southern Oregon called Ashland, was part of the Chautauqua movement. It built its first Chautauqua building in 1893. William Jennings Bryan spoke there in 1897, and eventually the site of the Chautauqua building became the center of the town's industry, which is the Oregon Shakespearean Festival, this world-famous theater, right at the site of Chautauqua. So Chautauqua has been actually at the heart of how I grew up, and so it's an absolute honor to be here.
Can you give me some Shakespeare?
Can I give you some Shakespeare?
I just thought that you brought that up, that the actors here just love Shakespeare.
And with good reason. And other than lines that are already very famous, which would not be any sort of flourish of my own Shakespearean education, I have to admit I couldn't go into any of the sonnets or more obscure lines of dialogue. The
question that puzzles me, and I don't know if there's an answer to it, but how does anybody accept radicalization, extremism, to the point of absolute nonsense and horror and whatever else it produces? I mean, how does anybody want that kind of life or that kind of philosophy for their particular what do you want to call it, religion?
It's a fantastic question, and one for which I think there's not any sort of one-size-fits-all answer. Obviously, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadist groups are not the first time we've seen totalitarian movements that radicalize people. The 20th century, of course, is full of these kinds of movements, ranging from the Nazis, communist groups, including the Khmer Rouge and the gulags in the Soviet Union, down to more obscure cults. For the United States, Jonestown resonates there. In Japan, you had Om Shinrikyo, which a Japanese cult which aspired to destroy the world based on their own understanding of the end times. I think that there's a few different threads that are worth looking at. To me, I'd begin it with the fact that we live in an imperfect world. We live in a world where there's manifestly injustice. There are things that are wrong. Dr. Haqqani spoke eloquently of the kind of grievances that you can see in some Muslim communities in the West, but there are plenty of grievances to go around, ranging from poverty, deprivation, ecological problems, and usually mass movements that go in this very destructive way begin with the idea that the world is flawed, that there's some sort of utopia they could bring, and ISIS is very much a utopian movement, and there's some group that's depriving us of being able to reach that utopia, whether it's the Jews or the capitalists or the kuffar, the non-believers. That's kind of at the heart of it, this black and white us-them issue, where if you can eliminate or overcome this group, you can achieve a utopian result. And if you look at ISIS's propaganda and ISIS's followers, they believe that what's there in Syria and Iraq and now Libya is this kind of paradise where people are living according to God's law, as perverse as it sounds, and there's a lot of perversity in it. That's where they're coming from.
It's astounding. It's astonishing that they would promote or they would legitimize killing other people because they're not of their faith.
Absolutely. And another thread to it, of course, I mean, there's multiple threads. I outlined one philosophical thread. They also have an intricate theology. There was just a New York Times piece written by Rukmini Callimachi, a wonderful national security reporter, on their theology of rape and how they come to the conclusion. And they've systematized rape of Yazidi women.
There was a headline in the paper the other day that they've recruited young girls and they're being raped by the Islamists.
So I think one thing, and to get back to the question that Dr. Haqqani very kindly referred to me on, one part of this is the way that we communicate has massively changed. I mean, I think you can't talk about the rise of ISIS without talking about not just the Internet, but also what we call Web 2.0, social media. The Internet used to once be much more static. And if you look at Al-Qaeda and its original propaganda, that was Web 1.0. That was, you can post a video online, you could post a statement online, and people could read it, and later on they added comment sections to these kinds of things, not just to Al-Qaeda, but to newspaper articles. But now you have this immersive medium. In social media, you have micro-posts and constant interaction with other users, and it can promote intimacy, feelings of intimacy with someone half a world away. If you were someone who was pro-jihadist, living in, say, Chautauqua, New York, back in the mid-1990s, you might never come in contact with another jihadist. You would be there by yourself. And now, today, you can hop online and right away be in communication and a deep relationship with somebody in ISIS's capital of Raqqa. And so when the Arab Spring came along, that was an example of social media mobilizing people. And I remember Dr. Haqqani spoke of the delusions that we sometimes have. I remember during the Arab Spring, people had this utopian view of what was coming based upon social media. That Twitter and people networking on dating sites where they were kind of disguising what they were doing, this happened in Libya, that this was going to sweep away the dictators and also sweep away the grievances that spurred people towards jihadism. And I remember warning at the time that, look, the good guys right now are using social media, but the bad guys can use it as well. And that's precisely what's happened. That's one way that people are able to radicalize at this pace. Already, you've had more people, more foreign fighters from Western countries and Tunisia and Saudi Arabia and other states go to Syria and Iraq to join jihadist groups than went to Afghanistan, went to South Asia during the entirety of the Afghan-Soviet war. You've had over 25,000 people from outside Iraq and Syria flock to that theater to join these movements, and part of the reason is the shift in medium. Of course, people are familiar with the famous statement that the medium is the message, and that's what is going on here. The medium has changed, and it's allowed mass radicalization, and ISIS will not be the last group to realize the potential to mobilize in this way.
How long is this war going to go on? It's not called, how long can we deal with individuals who are one-person armies, you might say? How long can you stop the Lone Rangers from going out and becoming jihadists and just going with mass killings, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a convention of one sort or another? They look for, their object today is mass killings. How long can we put up with that?
We've lived in a world where one-person armies and mass killings have just become much more prevalent. I mean, outside the realm of jihadism, when the Columbine school shooting occurred in 1999, that was shocking to us. And now we've become all too accustomed to school shootings, now theater shootings. That's going to go on, and that's going to be one of the big dilemmas of the 21st century. How do you deal with the increasing destructive potential of one person? I think, to me, one of the big questions is how long can ISIS, as a viable form of government, sustain? Because even though lone wolves have become more dangerous, it's easier to rally them, I still think that it's organizations and networks that pose a strategic threat as opposed to more of a tactical threat. We don't worry about, Sandy Hook, that school shooting was awful. We don't worry about that fundamentally threatening the United States. It's an absolute tragedy. But we don't worry about that threatening the United States. It's when you hit that mass movement where territory the size of Great Britain is controlled by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and before it, northern Mali was controlled by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and southern Somalia was controlled by Shabab. That's where it starts to become more of a strategic danger and not just the potential of one person. But we do have to, I think very deeply about what the increasingly destructive potential of one person means in this century.
Well, you've heard the president simply say, we will degrade and we will destroy ISIS. What's the potential?
Well, we haven't been fighting them like we want to degrade and destroy them. The rules of engagement are extraordinarily limited, including not being able to fire upon convoys unless it's clear that they're actually engaged in combat. We've been fighting them like we want to nip around the edges, and I think that's a real problem. If we enter into a war, I think we need to understand what's the end game, how do we win. We shouldn't go to war lightly, and if you go to war like you want to nip around the edges, and then it's a recipe for fighting them for years and almost swimming in place. I do think ISIS is in a bit more trouble than people realize. You've had a Kurdish group, the YPG, end up in an offensive in their capital of Raqqa province. They've taken about a third of that province. Their logistical routes, they lose them from time to time. And I think that if U.S. strategy were to improve in certain definable ways, we could do a lot more damage to that organization. Right now, though, in my view, we're not fighting like we mean to win.
What weapon do we need, or weapons do we need? How do we deprive them of the money they're getting to buy the weapons? How do we deprive other nations from giving them the weapons? If we take that away from them, they will not have that potential that they have now.
Depriving them of their money is essential. And there was this, you and your listeners may have heard of this, there was a raid in eastern Syria which captured a minister, killed him, and captured his documents, named Abu Sayyaf, father of the sword. And, he had a lot of documents which, this has been reported openly, which indicate where their business is being done. We can drive up the cost of their financial enterprise by going after the middlemen who smuggle their oil, by going after their antiquities smuggling. There are also some hard questions to be raised. Right now the Iraqi government is still paying the salaries of bureaucrats who are in territory captured by ISIS. The bureaucrats are still working, administering services, and ISIS is taxing them. It's taxing the paychecks that the Iraqi government sent to them. So quite literally, the Iraqi government is financing ISIS and paying for its bureaucrats who administer the services that ISIS trumpets as a big part of what it does. Now, if you were to cut off their paychecks, people who have the misfortune of living in ISIS's territory will be deprived of those services. But these are the kind of questions that really need to be asked if you want to end this quickly, as opposed to having a long, drawn-out war that ends in a stalemate. So I think there's things that can be done, and they have costs. And that's what war is about. And those are the kind of discussions that I think need to be had.
Are we going to get back the territory they've already conquered?
Maybe. But the question is, what then? If ISIS were to disappear tomorrow, you already have another group, the Nusra Front, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate. They're very clear that they're part of al-Qaeda's network, which also controls a significant amount of territory in Syria. Syria has fallen apart as a state. We will probably never see a Syrian state that looks like it did.
Let me interject if I can here. I got to get another opinion out of what I'm saying here about Syria and its future. Can you just give me an idea of why is Assad doing what he's doing, destroying the country literally?
Well, for one thing, one must understand the nature of the Assad regime. Assad is an Alawite. The Alawites are 10% to 12% of the total population of Syria. Syria is a country that is not based on any historic borders. It's a country that was contrived by the French and the British, to some extent, when they governed in that region after the First World War. So the French policy was recruit more officers from minorities, and the Alawites were a minority. So the military ended up being Alawite-dominated. 60-70% of the officers' corps is Alawite. So for him, it's a battle for survival. He thinks that, his family and the Alawite community, his clan, have ruled Syria now for more than 35, 40 years. And during that period, they have created a minority-dominated regime. If the majority is able to topple them, the majority is going to be ruthless with them. So they are doing it for survival, as are other ethnic groups and sects. And if people can understand that, and the international community can figure out a way of getting people to make a compact and figure out, maybe even change the borders and have more compact countries that are more in tune with who lives there, rather than some border that was contrived by European officials way back, and without regard for who's a majority, who's a minority, then maybe Syria can have peace. If not, we will see trouble in that region for quite a while to come. And I think David is shaking his head. He probably agrees with that. He does.
Let me ask this question quickly, and both of you answer it. We're hearing a lot about whether or not we should put boots on the ground in this war. What are your thoughts?
No, we shouldn't. Not in the way that people mean by boots on the ground, which is a very confused phrase. We very literally do have boots on the ground.
I mean putting troops on the ground.
Well, we do have troops on the ground already. We have.
No, but in combat. They're now called advisors.
Okay, but there's a difference, I think, between special forces and conventional forces. When people talk about this, they're really talking about whether there should be a conventional force deployment, which there absolutely should not be. I think special forces have been on the ground. The Abu Sayyaf raid I talked about, that was done by U.S. Special Forces, and it resulted in 0 American casualties and all the bad guys dead. So I think that special forces, I am all for. I think we should use them more. Conventional forces, occupation, absolutely not.
My quick answer, Jim, is that Sun Tzu says, know thyself, know thy enemy, and then only can you have victory. Well, know thyself, first of all, understand one thing. Americans don't like foreign wars. The First and the Second World War, you went in, you had a clear target, you destroyed Germany, you destroyed Japan, and then you sort of rebuilt them later on, or let them or help them rebuild it. That was easier. Complex situations, you don't do too well. Let's be honest. So don't do it. And you didn't do well in Vietnam. You got entangled in all kinds of domestic politics, etc. You didn't understand, and then you don't do patience well. Anything that requires more than 2, 3, 4 years, people start saying, "What the heck is going on? Let's get out of here." So the same is going to happen. So putting large number of boots on ground doesn't make sense. That said, you are the world's sole superpower still. You are the world's largest military power. You have a responsibility. Exercise that responsibility with some wisdom. You have air power. You have special forces. You have intelligence capabilities that, if harnessed properly, can help you do a lot. After all, it was your intelligence capabilities that enabled you, with some special ops forces, to get bin Laden. Something like that. Act intelligently and with wisdom, not with large number of troops on the ground.
Is that what Trump is going to do? I had to throw that in. I don't know why.
Look, I've never played golf at a Trump course. I've never eaten at a Trump hotel, and I've never lived in a Trump building. So I don't know how efficient he might be. But looking at him on television, I always wonder, why is he in the news shows and not in Saturday Night Live?
Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very good. I'll see you on CNN. Thank you very much. We'll be back after the news. Don't go away. Go away. Go away. Go away. Go away.